God.
Okay, I was just finishing. I was recalling how I met you, and then how we got to know each other. And then lots of people here have asked me, well, how did you get to host an event for Andrew Yang? And basically the answer is because they asked. So here I am. Well, I feel like I'm kind of preaching to the choir a little bit because all of you guys are here because of how spectacular Andrew is and the various ways that we believe he will change the country. So without further ado, please welcome Andrew Yang.
Hello. Thank you. Let's give Rick and Katie a huge round of applause for hosting us and running their beautiful home. Oh, so gorgeous. I'm sort of glad my wife's not here to see this. Like, why do we live in New York again? She actually does get like that. She's very, very envious of the Southern California lifestyle in particular. It's great to be here, and I'd love to make this sort of intimate event and take some questions and try and help move your understanding of the campaign forward, because I have a feeling that most of you have seen me speak on the TV or the video, and so I can get all that stuff out of the way. So is that right? Raise your hand if you've actually seen me speak enough where you're like, okay, I get like the general, the general gist. If you're not in that, don't worry, I'll do like a whole one-on-one, like 20-minute individually. But I'm not someone who ever thought he'd run for president. And in this crew, I can make the joke, it's like, I'm Asian. It's not like your parents are like, you're gonna be president someday. It's not really on the list. I grew up like many of you. My parents met at UC Berkeley as graduate students. Anyone who grew up? Yeah. I figured here in California there'd be some. So they met at Berkeley. My brother's actually named after the Lawrence Observatory. So we used to joke that my parents got busy there, but I'm sure they didn't. They were well-behaved Taiwanese graduate students. And my father intended to try and stay, but they loved California, because what's not to love? Can you imagine immigrating to Berkeley from Taiwan? They were like, let's stay here. And then my dad tried to get jobs on the West Coast and then wound up finding a job on the East Coast at GE in Schenectady, New York. So they reluctantly moved to upstate New York, and that's where I was born. So I was born in Schenectady, then my dad moved from GE to IBM. My dad's a physicist. He generated 69 US patents for GE and IBM over his career. And I remember when I was a teenager and old enough, well, first, I thought everyone's dad had a PhD when I was a kid, so I was like, oh, what's your dad's PhD? And then the kids, like, taught me the hard way. I was like, wrong. I was like, oh, what did I do wrong? And then I got a little bit older, and then I realized that my dad had these patents. I was like, hey, Dad, how much do you get paid when you make a patent? And then he said, oh, I get paid like $200, $250. I was like, that doesn't seem like a lot. That's not a very good deal. And then he said, well, I also get paid a salary to house and feed and clothe you and your brother. And I was like, oh, I get it. I get how your job works. So he generated a number of patents over his career. My mom worked at a local university and then became a pastel artist. And my parents told me what I think many of you might have heard, which is to just do well in school. And so I was pretty good at school. I went to Exeter and then Brown and then Columbia for law school. And I know Dave from our law school days. Where's Dave Min? Let's give Dave Min a round of applause, because he's going to be an incredible champion for the community in the months and years to come. So I was in law school. I was an unhappy corporate attorney for 5 whole months. Thought the job was pretty terrible. No offense to the lawyers here. I know there are some of you. I think my joke at the time was that my law firm was like a temple to the squandering of human potential.
That's right.
Because I was like, wow, we have a lot of really smart people here doing this very, very, essentially, like, brainless, menial work for the most part. And so I like laughing. It's like hitting close to hope. I need to tell you guys a follow-up story from like years later. A major law firm brought me in during like the depths of the recession and the financial crash to try and like encourage attrition. They were like trying to get their associates to leave, so they brought me in to be like, it's better out there. Anyway, so I left the law firm after 5 months to start a business, and I know there's a very entrepreneurial crowd. Katie and I bonded in part because she's such an incredible entrepreneur, and I know many of you have done something similar. How many of you have started a business or an organization or a club or an effort of some kind? Yeah, look at that, look at that, set of hands, I love it, I knew it. So I ventured out to try and start a business in my mid-20s. I left the firm after 5 months. If you have your hand up, you know a couple of things. Number one, you know that starting a business is much, much harder than anyone indicated before you started your first business. Number two, you know that when someone asks you how it's going, what do you say? Great. It's going great. There's only one answer to that question. If you talk about the problems, people are like, I'm not going to buy your stuff. So it's always like, it's going great. So my business went great until it failed. My parents told their friends I was still a lawyer. They're like, oh, Andy's doing all right. In reality, I'd lost investors, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I owed $100K in law school debt. I used to call my school loans my mistress because I was like writing a check to a phantom family in another town. It's like, hope they're having a good time. So this is just letting you know that like none of this was like, oh, this guy's presidential material. Throughout my 20s, I was just learning the hard way, starting this business. But I've been bitten by the bug, and like many of you who've done it, I know if you raise your hand and you start a business, you've probably done more than one thing. It's probably unlikely that you started a business 25 years ago and you've been doing the same thing. So I worked with a series of startups, became the CEO of an education company that grew to become #1 in the US and was then bought by a public company in 2009. So this, to me, was where like my path turned towards me running for president. Because up to this point, fairly normal stuff, startup, entrepreneur. My business acquired in 2009 was a very, very rough time in a lot of the country. It's like the financial crisis in full bloom. And I thought that I had some insight as to why the financial crisis had happened. It's because so many of my classmates from Exeter and Brown and Columbia had gone to Wall Street to create these exotic financial instruments that had contributed to the financial crisis. So I thought, well, that's a disaster. And I'd had my career shaped so profoundly by entrepreneurship that I said, well, I'd love to have more young people follow that path, like the path that many of you followed. And I think there's a Venture for America fellow here. Is that right? Did someone get? Yes. So let's give her a round of applause. She is going. She's 2020, so she's going to show up in Detroit next summer for training camp, make a bunch of incredible new friends. So I spent 7 years running this organization, Venture for America, to help cultivate entrepreneurship in Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Birmingham, New Orleans. And at this juncture, I thought, well, a lot of you are doing very positive things. I know Katie is doing very positive things. And most of us wait to do that at some point in our career when we're frankly doing pretty well. And it's like, all right, I'm doing all right. It's time to give back. So I thought I would do this in the middle of my career instead of at the end. I thought, like, well, this will be a way I can just do more good faster. And so Venture for America was this incredible education for me. How many of you grew up here in California? Sense that most of you. Look at that. I thought so. Yeah, it's very nice here. Like, why would I leave? Anyone here grew up in the Midwest? The South? So if you grew up in the Midwest or the South, you saw a lot of what I saw over the last 7 years, which was totally new to me, because I grew up in the Northeast, so I had never been to Birmingham or St. Louis or even Detroit or Cleveland. And I saw the gulf between different parts of the country was so much bigger than anything I'd imagined. Where if you fly between a place like this, frankly, and Michigan or Ohio, you feel like you're traversing not just a few time zones, you feel like you're crossing dimensions or decades or ways of life. And so I was staggered when I went out there to the country and spent 7 years learning all this. And then Donald Trump became our president in 2016. Now, many of you are here today because you were not excited about Donald Trump becoming president in 2016. Though I'd imagine some of you probably were excited that he won. And all of us have family members and friends and neighbors that supported Donald Trump. To me, his election was a clear red flag that things had gone fundamentally wrong for many, many Americans. And again, I thought I had some insight why, which is that like I'd spent 7 years in the Midwest and the South, and I saw that the economy had evolved in ways that had left many, many people behind. So this is all a very elaborate way of saying, like, I never intended to run for president, but if you've been through what I've been through the last now 8-9 years, you feel like you had some understanding that the rest of the country did not. Where I feel like our economy is like an elephant. You guys all know the parable of the elephant, where it's like the blind man and the elephant, where it's like you ask the blind man what the elephant looks like, and he says it's a tree trunk, and another person says it's a snake, and another person says it's a rope. And I feel like that's the U.S. economy for most Americans, where there's touching a piece of it. And I felt like because I'd spent the last 7 years traveling the Midwest and the South, and living and working in New York and San Francisco and DC, that I felt like I understood what the elephant looked like in a way that most Americans did not. And I had a personal stake in it because I felt like immigrants were being scapegoated for issues that immigrants had nothing to do with. And that my country did not understand that we're going through this fundamental economic transformation, this fourth industrial revolution that now is accelerating. It's going to leave many more Americans behind. So this is a long-winded way of saying that this is what got me to run for president. It was like, okay, I get it. I believe I have something to contribute that's different than anyone else in the field, and that I can make this case to the American people that we have these fundamental problems to solve, and it's not these cultural symptoms or emblems, that these food fights of the political world that we should be focused on. We should be focused on this fundamental economic transformation. And I will say to you all that one of the things that got me to run for president was thinking, you know what, I bet I can make the debate stage. And I think that having an Asian American on the debate stage would be very, very good for the Asian American community. That was self-conscious. I was like, yeah, I bet I can do that. But now I stand before you today, either 4th, 5th, or 6th in national polls. One poll that came out that said I'm polling higher than Kamala Harris here in California.
Yeah.
So just like you, I'm like an immigrant or a child of immigrants, which you know what happens? The better I do, the greedier I get. So now I'm not content just to make the debate stage. We can win this whole thing.
Yeah.
We genuinely can. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through some of the inside baseball as to, because you all think the same way I do, I believe. Our path to victory is very real. I've looked at the numbers, I've looked at the math. The math, yeah. So we're consistently rising in the polls. How many of you have participated in a political poll? Raise your hand. So it's a relatively low proportion of you, which makes sense, because most of the people that get polled get called on landlines. So they're like some teenager here is like, landline? So there are a few things that happen in terms of your participating in a political poll. Number one, you generally have to have a landline. Number two, you generally have to be a registered Democrat. Number three, you actually have to pick up the phone and talk to the pollster involved. So these are not things that overlap that heavily with my support base, frankly, because our support base tends to skew a bit younger, a bit more tech savvy, and we're drawing higher proportions of independents and libertarians and even Republicans than other Democratic candidates. So even though our poll numbers are rising, our internal numbers show that our real support's actually a whole level higher than what the polls are showing. This is going to be particularly fruitful in a place like New Hampshire that's an open primary. You can actually show up day of in New Hampshire and just be like, hey, I'm gonna, you can just like participate in the Democratic primary essentially. And the third party in New Hampshire is libertarians. And libertarians really seem to like me a lot. Maybe it's because the freedom dividend is sort of named after them. And I seem like I have something of a libertarian streak, which I'll confess I sort of do. Because I really dislike laws that either don't make sense or cannot be enforced or just like are sort of there on the books, but then people are just like finding their way around them. I think those sorts of laws are deeply unproductive. So in New Hampshire, our numbers show that even though our polls are going up and up, where we've been polling at like 5, 6, 7% in some polls, our real support is higher than that. And the press is going to come in, and if we can shock the world in one of the early states, how many of you are really into politics? Raise your hand on that. All right.
Because of you.
Thanks for saying that, Henry. You know, I do get that a lot too, because we're activating a lot of people that have not been traditionally into politics that much, which also happens to overlap with Asian Americans. That's true. So it's another reason why I decided to run is I thought I could help activate the Asian American community politically. So as I get on the debate stage, activate our community, because I fundamentally do believe that we have to contribute much more to the political conversation in this country. We have a lot to offer. I say, it's like, look, my parents came here for a better life for me and my brother, and it worked. And now we have to give back because this country needs us. So the support we're going to get in some of the early states is going to surprise the press a lot. The $10 million we raised in the last quarter surprised the press a lot. And thank you for everyone who contributed to that, which I suspect is most of you. Now, despite this incredible backdrop, something like 90% plus of those donations were small dollar donations. The increments were only $30 each. So I joke that my fans are almost as cheap as Bernie's. This is very much a grassroots campaign. Yang Gang is generally a very cheap gang to join. But our internal numbers are also showing growth. We're growing from Q3. So we raised $2.8 million in Q2, and people are like, oh, that's interesting. Raised $10 million in Q3, and then people are like, whoa, like that's like 50% more than Booker, and 100% more than Klobuchar. Like, so like that number is significant, and we're one of only 6 candidates in the field that now has 7-digit buying power for ads and the like. And so that's what we're doing. You're going to see Andrew Yang TV ads coming up. Probably not where you live, because we're not going to blow it on Southern California. But if you move to Iowa. So the game plan is for us to invest the resources. We're growing. We're raising more money. We're on pace to raise more money in Q4 than Q3 too. So the press will be like, oh, this growth. We're one of only 2 campaigns in the field that's grown every period. So we're going to grow and grow and grow. And then the first state to vote is Iowa, where I'm heading. I'm going there November 1st, which I think is this Friday. My wife's coming with me, so that's going to be fun.
Yangapalooza?
Yeah, Yangapalooza. So Rivers Cuomo of Weezer is coming in to do like a Weezer concert in Iowa for the campaign.
Is Zoo coming?
I don't know if Zoo is. No, Zoo's not coming. Which is too bad. I was just in a dance music video. Yeah, I came for the low. I have to wait till the end of the video for my cameo. I'm going to tell you guys a story that some of you will appreciate. So I guested at this Rich Brian concert in New York a couple weeks ago. You guys see that?
Yeah.
So Rich Brian's this Asian rapper. So if you're my age, if you don't know about him, don't worry about it. So I was like, so I'm like Twitter friends with him. So I was like, hey, you're playing in New York. Can I come show up to your concert? And he's like, sure. So, great. So I go backstage, have some fun, like, you know, we're bonding, whatnot. And then I'm about to go on stage, about to introduce me. And my wife was there for this too, because, you know, I was in New York. And so we looked up, and I was like, hey, do you think the crowd's gonna, like, recognize me? I was like, I don't know. It's like freaking... Like teenagers at a rap concert? Do you think they're like keeping up with politics? I'm like, I don't know. I guess we'll find out. So I go out there, and then like they freaking go crazy. You know, it's like they start chanting Andrew Yang. I think even Rich Brian was like, what the hell? So we're trying to reach different types of Americans, including the Asian American community, and our numbers show that it's working. Numbers are showing that a really significant proportion of the people that support this campaign are politically disengaged people. It's their first time actually caring about politics. And very, very high proportions of these independents. So it's one reason why having someone like Rivers Cuomo go to Iowa is like a nice win for us, because, you know, we bring in people that might not naturally be into politics. The first state to vote is Iowa. The second state to vote is New Hampshire. The third state is Nevada. The fourth is South Carolina. So to give you a map of this, Iowa's going to be a tougher environment for us, in part because every other campaign is freaking, like, just flooding the market with TV ads. And like a lot of the other campaigns are essentially saying, like, if it doesn't go well in Iowa, it's not going to work. This is one thing that came out of like the Kamala Harris campaign. You probably saw this, where she said like she's moving to Iowa because they decided that Iowa. I left a word out of that statement. She's moving to Iowa anyway. If you're into politics, you know what I'm talking about. So that is not the situation we're in. We're going to compete in Iowa, but we think that we can surprise to the extreme upside in New Hampshire, and we also think we can surprise to the supreme upside in Nevada, where I just was. There's a lot of enthusiasm for the campaign in Nevada, and there's a really great thing. Do you all know that Nevada is #1 in the country for the proportion of jobs that are subject to automation? Yeah. So you go there and you talk about technology trends and the rest of it, they're like, oh man. Like MGM just fired hundreds of people and brought in robot bartenders. Turns out the tourists prefer the robot bartenders. And the robot bartender will pay for itself over a particular, every business person here knows. Like the robot bartender costs about $240,000. So you do the math on that and you're like, okay, I'll get my money back over like a 5-year period, and that's a win. So Nevada is going to be great for us. New Hampshire is going to be great for us. And the way that South Carolina works is South Carolina is kind of like a lagging indicator, because South Carolina voters actually aren't as politically focused as the other early states. They tend to go where the race is going. And as one example of this, most prominent, was that Hillary Clinton was way outperforming Barack Obama in South Carolina before Barack Obama won some of these earlier states, and then all of a sudden South Carolina looked up and was like, we can choose that guy. That way. So the plan for us is to outperform in all 3 of the first 3 states, but the bar in Iowa is going to be a different bar. We think we can compete at the very, very highest levels in New Hampshire and Nevada, and that what the polls show really understates our strength, according to the numbers we're seeing. Like, I've met, at this point, tens of thousands of Americans, at least in some capacity, and this campaign contains a vision for a brighter future for so many of us, so many of them. We have to show our fellow Americans what is still possible. We have to restore a sense of optimism and possibility in this country, and a degree of unity, because there are some of the other candidates in the field. The fact is, if they do win, we're in for another 4 years of gridlock and polarization, and I believe that I can help change that. I can help the country see that it's not left, it's not right, it is forward, and that is where we can take the country together in 2020. Thank you so much. Thank you. Love you all, and I'd love to take some questions. I'm going to have Carly run.
Yeah, this guy, he's a serious contender now. Like, we've watched him grow, and it's been a pleasure watching you grow. Like, I mean, check out his hair game in this book, and check out now. Like, oh man, it's great. So I do have a question about democracy dollars. How would you fund the democracy dollars?
So for those of you who aren't familiar, Democracy Dollars is a plan I propose to give every American adult 100 democracy dollars that you can give to any candidates or campaigns. Every year, it's use it or lose it, so if you don't use it, it's disappearing, then you get another 100 the next year. And the reason for this is that right now our government has been overrun by lobbyists and corporate special interests, and almost no matter what rules you put in place, the money will find its way back in. It's like life in Jurassic Park, it's like the money will find a way. And so the best counter to me is to put the money back into people's hands. And the amount of money we're talking about, the democracy dollars, in the scheme of things, is actually not that huge. Like the return on lobbyist investment, to the extent you can consider lobbying an investment, one study showed that lobbying had a return of 22,000%. That's something ridiculous. So lobbying cash is not going to go away. In a way, what we have to do is we have to give the people our own means of lobbying. And as someone running for president, I can say this sort of gathering is an exception, where most of the time, if you have the people on one side, you have the money on the other. You know what I mean? And as a legislator, you end up being responsive to the money because it's easier to measure. The food is better. Like it's like events are fancier. And so you end up veering towards the money and away from the people. And if you actually can unify the people and the money, where if I get 10,000 Americans behind me, it's like $100, and then the lobbyist comes with 100,000, you'd be like, I don't care about your 100,000. Like, I'm focused on the people. In the scheme of a functional government, this investment is not going to be very significant, particularly because it's going to take the form of essentially vouchers, where like you have a code and then you like issue it to a campaign, and the campaign then redeems it with the government, and then we just like send them cash. So the cost, if you had to put a number on it, it's in the low billions, which for a functional government is actually like a very, very reasonable investment. This is actually now the second most popular plan in my campaign after the freedom dividend is democracy dollars. And when I said democracy dollars at one of the debates, I saw Al Sharpton look up and get up and start clapping, and I was like, oh, Al heard me. Those debates, so much fun. I mean, Katie, you were at the Detroit debate. Did you come to the one after that too? Houston. So are you coming to Atlanta?
I don't know, am I?
Good question. Depends upon how much money your friends contribute. I'm kidding. That's not the reason. I was kidding. Yeah, do you have a... Oh, wait, you want to pass it? We just get a mic.
You want to pass it over to Cyrus?
Oh, he's right next to him. He's got a question. He's on the mic.
Hi, my name is Cyrus Nimani, and I work on a televised poker show for 2 years. Yeah, and we recently had a contest where you raised 1 yang for the campaign. Yeah, so you came out in support of legalizing online poker yesterday, and which left the U.S. market in large part because of regulations on transferring money online. So what would online poker look like under a Yang presidency?
So I was in Las Vegas yesterday campaigning, and a professional poker player, maybe someone similar to you, Cyrus, actually came up and said, hey, these rules have gotten completely bizarre. It's forced us all to go offshore. It was put in place by like this person suggested that it was protecting certain casinos in certain states that then thought they'd get more business. So to me, it reminded me a little bit of the marijuana laws in the country. Where you have this hodgepodge state by state, and it's legal some places and not other places, which ends up creating in some ways the worst of all worlds. And so to me, we need to clarify the rules, and the best way to clarify them in my mind would be to make online poker legal nationwide, and then you'd have some mechanism also to fund gambling addiction programs and things that you could see there might be some negative effects from legalization. Though this is an example of what I said before, where there's a law in the books, but we all know to play online poker, you're laughing. It's if I was in a state where it wasn't legal, you would just find a way to you just go offshore, and then who loses? The player, American businesses, and some of these offshore businesses are apparently really shady, and there's no legal recourse if you end up having a problem. So would love to talk to you, Cyrus, about whether there are specific issues within the legalization of online poker nationwide. But it sounds like things were better before 8 years ago, it was a suggestion. And so we can return to something close to that and improve on that. That would be my goal.
Unfortunately, going to just have to do one more question.
Let's find a woman, too. We just have two dudes.
We'll do co-ed.
If I played online, it would not be great. My poker skills are not as good as some people would think.
Hey, let's play.
No, I do understand the math behind poker.
Hi.
Audrey.
So I'm Audrey, I'm 11, and I had a question to ask you. So I'm part of my 6th grade debate team, and I know you do debate. And so last weekend we had a tournament, and our topic was, are rideshare drivers contractors or employees? I want to know what your answer to that is.
Wow, that's a great question. Well, when I ran a business, we had a similar issue with our instructors. Are your instructors contractors or employees? And in our case, there were a couple of variables that went in. One, which we all know, is just the number of hours a week you spend doing it. And if you spend over a certain threshold, then you crossed into a zone where at least legally there's an argument that you should be a full-time employee. So that's something I would apply to rideshare drivers. If someone's just occasionally doing a rideshare, on on let's say some weekend day, then that's probably not a job. If they're doing it 40 plus hours a week and the company knows that, then that's much closer to a job, and then you should actually have some responsibilities. As someone who's run a business, I know that the incentives are very, very clear to try and have someone not be a full-time employee, because then you have this whole suite of legal and regulatory obligations, and there's almost no sane business that wants those obligations and costs. And so the very clear economic incentive is for the rideshare businesses to be like, you are all contractors. It's not just rideshare companies, it's many companies in many industries. And to me, the tough part, Audrey, is that we're looking up and saying this is fundamentally unjust, which it is unjust, because we have this winner-take-all economy and these people are just like grinding in these subsistence roles. But then we're actually like beating up the businesses for the set of incentives that we've set up. And that's actually not right either. To me, the goal should be to make it so that we have basic benefits that are essentially independent of your job, and not just beat up the businesses and say you need to provide better healthcare and other provisions. We have to do that for everyone, because 94% of the new jobs created in the US now have gig or contract jobs. And there's an economic term called job lock that we've all seen in our lives, which is that people are stuck in jobs because of healthcare, insurance, and other benefits. It's bad for our economy, it's bad for business formation, it's bad for dynamism. If you look at it, like, they don't even try. Very, very few polls come out in Nevada. So it's going to be sort of a black box going into this. This is all to give you a sense of the mechanics, because we are playing to win. And this field is still very, very fragmented. I'll give you an example from our not so distant past. John Kerry was polling at about 4% at the end of 2003, and then he wound up winning in 2004. The vast majority of voters are like many of your friends, where they're not even actually focused on this race right now. Something like 75% of even the primary voters in the early states say they do not know who they're going to support yet. So this race is right there for us. Some of you are here because you think, hey, I like this guy, I love Katie, it's like we're going to come support him. We can win this thing. We can win. If you have any doubt in your mind, please do get in touch with the team. We can walk you through some of these numbers we're looking at, but we can win. This field is very fragmented, and there is not any one front runner that's going to take the field. So many voters are just looking around for an option. What's the number one criteria for Democratic primary voters in the nominee?
Beat Donald Trump.
Beat Donald Trump. And there are a lot of things coming out that are showing that I have higher crossover appeal than any of the other candidates, and will become one of the strongest candidates to beat Donald Trump in 2020. When Democrats figure out that the Asian guy who wants to give everyone money is actually one of the strongest candidates to beat Donald Trump, and you're going to see the poll numbers rise. Mainstream press is catching up. But we could not do it without all of your help. You all are the early adopters, the champions. Carly's here because Carly's the person that, if you'd like to host or co-host an event for the campaign, Carly will ask you, essentially, if you ask her to ask you. You know what I mean? So I'm going to give the mic to Carly for just a second. You can introduce yourself, and then I'll give some closing remarks, and then we'll take some pictures. Here we go, Carly.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. So first of all, thank you all so much for being here. I've communicated